Welcome. My name is Natasha Sherman, and I am your host. And my guest today is Scott Stevens. Scott Stevens is the author of 4 award-winning addiction, health, and recovery titles since 2010. He has 2 USA Best Books Awards, a Next Generation Indie Books Award, and a Book Excellence Award. Scott was named chair of the 2018 International Conference on Addiction Therapy and Clinical Reports. He is a journalist posting regularly on health and alcohol issues for online news service. Stevens blends his stunning personal 86-proof 2 liters a day story with thorough research into alcoholism, sobriety, relapse, and recovery. Welcome. That's quite a bio.
Thank you, Natasha. It's been quite a journey, actually.
Yes, it sounds like it. So just to get straight, your latest book is Look What Dragged the Cat In.
Yep, and that is my latest. It came out a couple years ago, and it gave me a lot of opportunity to talk about the opioid crisis that we're in, but also the crisis behind the crisis and how we got here.
Excellent, and I want to talk about that. But tell me a little bit about your journey in terms of, clearly you had a drinking problem, yes?
Oh, no question about it. Like many people with a drinking problem, I first denied it, and then I tried to solve it myself, and it only got worse. At one point, I was up to over 2 liters of Jack Daniels every day, and I wasn't drinking to get sloppy or slurry or stumbling. I was just drinking to stave off the shakes, and the severity of my disease and the severity or the height of my tolerance was pretty crazy at one point, and I ended up in the legal system through drinking and driving, which was nobody's fault but my own. And then it was time to get help, and it took a while to get the help, but I've been clean, sober since October 10th or October 17th, 2010, and since then I've dedicated my time and my efforts into researching why me? What's with this drug? Why couldn't I stay away from it when all the consequences in the world were stacked against me? I still went to it. So I had to dig in a little bit more deeper into the drug itself and the disease of alcoholism, which led to these 5 books.
It's very interesting that you call it a drug. So I'd like you to say more about that. In terms of your drinking, the period where it's kind of a journey. You didn't become an alcoholic overnight.
No. I realized in 2004 that I was the alcoholic I didn't want to be, but there's a genetic component to the alcoholism, which probably came down from my parents, but no alcoholic ever became alcoholic without taking the first drink, and that's on me, okay? And the scale to which my disease progressed was entirely the addiction itself, the need for more, despite the consequences. And this drug works no differently than any of the other drugs of addiction that we talk about, whether it's opiates or cocaine, stimulants like that, methamphetamines. The classification of this as a drug is something we just don't talk about because it's on TV every day, every sporting event that we see on the television. We don't call it a drug. We call it beer. We call it wine. We call it whiskey. But the component within beer, wine, and whiskey that makes us feel good is a mind-altering drug. And every time we put it in our system, it is a toxin and a known carcinogen, in addition to being a pretty hefty drug in itself. And as a drug, it is the number 3 cause of preventable death worldwide.
Wow. So there's a lot in what you just said. So the thing is, right now we have this opioid crisis epidemic. I know you distinguish between those two. So you get addicted to an opiate very quickly.
Yes.
And so it's kind of a predictable outcome, whereas not everybody who takes a drink, as you say, you're the one who took that first drink, not everyone who takes that first drink has a drinking problem or becomes an alcoholic.
That's correct. The way that this drug works is different than the others in that the progression of the disease at first is very slow. And not everybody who drinks is going to be alcoholic. I'm perfectly clear on that, please. But the person who has the genetics to become alcoholic certainly is feeding that tendency, that susceptibility. But a person without those genetics, this toxin is so powerful it can alter your DNA. So as a result of continuing to consume more and more, their body is altered and they become addicted to the substance. Not as quickly, as you pointed out, to something like opiates or cocaine even, but it's a slow progression.
And, again, I want to hone in on your message, which is this is the starter drug. And and it's pervasive in our society. It's just it's part of who we are. We go out, we have drinks. We have a party, we have drinks. We go to a sporting event, we have drinks. I do remember years ago going to a concert where they were serving alcohol, and it was in the middle of a highway. You had to drive out. And there were policemen there in police cars. And I remember thinking, how is it that it's okay to serve alcohol at a concert and allow all these people to drive, and the police are hanging out just to watch the crowd? So it is that pervasive. It is kind of a way of life. And then how do you convince people that of the damage it does? You talked about it as a toxin and a carcinogen. So say more about that.
When we look at this as a gateway drug, the American Addiction Centers did a study in 2018 that showed that 2 out of 3 illicit drug users used this drug, alcohol, as their first drug. So it is the gateway drug into the opioid crisis. The rest of us, the other 1/3 of the illicit drug users, learned how to use drugs through our cultural acceptability of this drug. Is so pervasive, as you pointed out. It's at church festivals. Everywhere you turn, we advertise it on TV. Where the message comes in here is, if we're going to talk about a crisis here, instead of throwing everything we've got at helping the people who need it, and certainly we must do that, but also we need to step backwards and look at how we got here. And if it's the gateway drug, how do we fix that? When I talk about the health consequences, and they're pretty severe from even moderate drinking, we're looking at a pattern that is very similar to how we addressed smoking. Remember smoking? It used to be socially acceptable, just like alcohol is. And now, since 1997, we've changed. In 1967, the year I was born, 72% of the adult males smoked. Today, 72% don't, because we changed the dialogue. We pointed out the health consequences, and it's time to look at the health consequences of alcohol with the same lens.
So I want you to talk to me a little bit. Again, most of us love to live in some form of denial. Oh, that's not good for me, but I'll have it just this once. So talk about some of the actual health consequences, because most people, I think, go to the extreme. Well, I don't get the shakes. Well, I don't have, my liver hasn't stopped functioning. So I don't see what's happening inside. I don't see the impact of the alcohol. But somewhere in your book, you statistically talk about how many people who end up in the hospital with alcohol-related issues. So talk to people about what it is that it's actually doing to your body.
Look at our healthcare crisis, for example. 20 to 40% of general use hospital beds are going to treat alcohol-related complications. So that might be part of the dialogue we have with the healthcare crisis. But it points to overall what it does to you systemically. It is a carcinogen, and if you follow the path it takes through the body, starting with the mouth, it's the number 2 cause of oral cancers. You're not going to get it with your first beer. This is like stepping off of a curb waiting for the truck to hit you. It comes later on through continued use, even moderate use, liver, stomach, all the way through. And ladies, this is the only dietary connection ever made to an increased risk for breast cancer. We don't talk about that when we're doing all the pink ribbons on beer cans. It's kind of a little bit of hypocrisy. It's a little bit of hypocrisy there. But aside from that, do you know that the number 1 killer of people with alcohol use disorders is not cirrhosis of the liver or car wrecks. It is heart disease, because this drug is very, very harmful to muscle tissue, your heart being the most valuable muscle in your body. And it's cumulative. over the years. So again, it's not like the opioid crisis where you have a bad batch of heroin or something laced with fentanyl and you pass away immediately. This is a cumulative thing that over time, and many people, long after they've stopped drinking, that's when they experience the health effects.
Wow. So I want to ask you a question. So now, everybody's a health expert. And so you get this, 1 or 2 glasses of wine a day are actually heart healthy. So what do you want to say about that?
That myth was disproved 10 years ago. It was a study sponsored by, wait for it, the wine industry. We got it. Okay, guys, we know. What is good in the red wine is the resveratrol, which comes from the skin of grapes. Just eat the grapes. Don't ferment them. Because the alcohol, it contradicts. It wipes out any benefit that you're getting from the resveratrol. And it, again, cumulatively weakens the heart muscle, but also raises the body of B vitamins, which are great for the heart, essential for the heart, and for the gray matter as well.
Wow. So then, and I'm going to jump around. What is the title, Look What Dragged the Cat In? Where does that come from?
Well, we're very busy with the opioid crisis, cleaning up the mess that the cat dragged in. So why don't we look, instead of pointing fingers at pharmaceutical companies, and I'm not saying they're off the hook, their hands are not clean on this, or pointing the fingers at doctors, let's look at what dragged the cat in instead of at the same time as cleaning up the mess that the cat dragged in. And that is looking at the gateway drug that got us here in the first place.
And it's interesting when you talk about the whole smoking thing, and we've so glamorized it. It's sexy, and
it was.
So even now when I see old movies, they light up cigarettes all the time. And if you watch some of the old, even Johnny Carson shows, they're smoking on the set. But also in the old movies, anytime they're sitting down to talk or an issue comes up, they pour whiskey. And that was very glam, and I think that's embedded in our kind of perception. But how do we, so, again, and this may be too broad a question, but why are we looking for an altered state to begin with? Like, isn't that the place to look?
That certainly is. I mean, if we look at our culture in general, we're a drug-taking culture. We have an ache and a pain, we pop a pill. And this drug doesn't happen to be in pill form, it happens to be in liquid form. And when you look at the reasons why we drink, an alcoholic and a non-alcoholic alike drink for the same reason, and that's to relieve stress. We need to be better as a culture at relieving stress. That is a bigger nut to crack than I've got the time or the effort to put into. But what I would like to look at is the alcohol, the access to it, and especially for minors. The age of first use in the U.S. is 12. So if we start talking younger to kids, just like we do with smoking, about the dangers of this, we can push that up and up and up. The earlier you start, the more susceptible you are to the disease of addiction, whether it's this drug or another.
I want to go back to that, but if you look in some countries in Europe, and I grew up in an immigrant family. I mean, it was, part of our, you could drink at any age, kind of, you would have company, and, if you look in France, wine, whatever. I'm not sure what the statistics are. Is there any case where it's okay?
Well, the World Health Organization did a study on that to look at the European model of having kids drink at home, grow up with wine in the house and as part of their dinners and everything. And their levels of addiction and ours are precisely the same, within a percentage point of each other.
Really?
So the model that we're talking about, where we think it's good to normalize it, isn't really helping the disease of addiction.
Okay, so what do we need to do?
Normalizing drug use is what we're doing.
Say that again?
We're normalizing drug use is what we're doing.
Yeah, so again, it's a very undesirable concept to most people who think of themselves as casual drinkers, and you're going to play takeaway?
I'm not into prohibition. I want to get that out here. Just more education.
Okay, so how would you start that? Like, if the model is the same model as what we did with smoking, what is it that we need to do, and who do we need to enroll in the concept?
Begins with advertising. Right now, the alcohol industry is self-regulated in its ads, so they can say anything they want as they're policing each other, and that needs to change. But also the pervasiveness of alcohol advertising everywhere we look, whether it's television, sports venues, etc. That the same way we stopped smoking advertising, we need to stop the alcohol advertising. Stop making it so visible and attractive and sexy, because the reality of this drug is that it isn't. And along with that, education beginning at the lower grade levels. As I was pointing out, right now, kids don't learn about drinking until the 6th or 7th grade. If the average age of first use is 12, that's 4th grade. So we missed the opportunity.
And what else? I mean, who do we have to, so you can stop we have to stop the advertising. What does that take? Certainly the alcohol industry is going to resist that entirely, so who has to get involved?
I'm having flashbacks of the congressional hearing that they had in the 1997, where we had 5 tobacco execs up there swearing under oath that they didn't know their or their smoking caused cancer. I mean, that is the kind of 3-ring circus that we're probably going to have in the congressional arena to start addressing the needs to alter advertising. The main thing with advertising is it's not geared to the child or to the person 21 years or older. It is geared toward people under 21. We're trying to groom the next generation of drinking. In fact, there was a study done by Johns Hopkins University that showed the kids under age 21 are shown 14% more advertising than the people over age 21. That's a mistake, and that needs to be cleaned up. And it's going to take another congressional 3-ring circus, like perhaps we saw in '97.
And is there anybody on your side?
Plenty of people. There is a contradiction within the government itself, where we issue from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services healthy dietary guidelines that suggest 1 drink a day, which is contrary to what the CDC says. So they need to get their act together in terms of being on the same page. But the lobby organization for the alcohol industry is very strong, as you might imagine. So the opponents to what I have to say are quite big. However, the health industry, the insurance industry, and of course, some components of the CDC are in here saying, stop this. We need to stop building or grooming a next generation of drinkers here, or we're already in a healthcare crisis. It's only going to grow larger.
Again, I want to, there are people who would say that alcohol is not the gateway drug, and alcohol is not an epidemic. Opioids are the epidemic. That's where we have to pay attention.
Right. The numbers disagree with that. If we look at the number of people, if we're looking at statistically, the number of people killed by alcohol is almost double what it is by opioid overdose. So we're at just over 48,000 a year opioid overdose deaths. We're at over 90,000 a year. 98,000 a year of alcohol-related deaths. So if opioids are an epidemic, alcohol is a pandemic. It's a bigger problem. But you also need to look at what it's doing to the family structure, and and what it does to society. I mean, when people are using opioids, they're usually using it in a small cluster and keeping to themselves in their cultural core there. When people are using alcohol, it is wide open and it's affecting everybody. It's known as secondhand drinking, just like we have secondhand smoking. We pay the consequences, as well as the family surrounding the person with the disease. The person with the disease can quit, but the rest of us still have the fallout to deal with. So there is a cultural expansion here that we look at as well that goes beyond just the numbers, the statistics, to say, well, more people are dead from alcohol than they are from opioids.
So what is it that got them to the point where we started the anti-smoking campaigns that we need to mimic and apply this to alcohol?
Well, there was a long lead time between the Surgeon General's report in 1964 to the time that we finally did something about smoking. So that was a few decades. But they didn't have the internet. Al Gore didn't invent it yet. So what we have today is a greater, more accessible communication medium to take the Surgeon General's report, which came out 3 years ago, saying that alcohol is a drug. These are the harms that alcohol does. That Surgeon General report is out there. It was produced by the Obama administration. So the facts are out there. Now we need to do something with them. So I think the lead time on this, within the next decade, we are going to see the end of alcohol advertising. Beyond the great things that MAD has done, Mothers Against Drunk Drivers, has done on their front of drinking, this is a broader scope, and it's going to take a little bit more time than, certainly not as much time as the smoking campaign. But as more people became aware of the dangers of the health dangers of smoking, then we did something. So now we have the seeds out there. It's time to sow them.
So let's say you're talking in front of the PTA. You've got all these parents and you want to educate them.
Right.
And they're all drinkers. Or
it
most of
happens
them
every time I get up and talk. It does.
So where is the turnaround? What's your success rate in having them actually get the message? And what is it that you say that alters that?
Well, with both schools and doctors groups and many of the varied audiences that I speak to whom I'm speaking, the message is education. We need to start earlier. I'm not in favor of taking this drug away from anybody, like prohibition would. That only creates more problems. That was a massive, some measures, immediately it was a success, but in the long term it was a failure. So we don't do that. What we do need to look at the accessibility for minors and moving that age of first use further down the road. A good part of that is my presentation on how alcohol affects a growing brain. Okay, and as we put more alcohol into developing tissue, then we're making that tissue, we're normalizing that tissue to accept this toxin, and it does more damage to a growing brain than it does an adult brain. So that kind of discussion, and I've got lots of charts that go along with it that are pretty compelling to say, look, there is a point here in delaying the first use, maybe not having it in our house, or maybe not having it so visible, and certainly educating our kids down to the lower grades, starting at kindergarten, first grade.
Yeah. And again, you get to parents through their children. So when you start talking about the impact, so say a little bit more about what is the actual physical impact on the brain of a growing, 12-year-old.
Mm-hmm. Your prefrontal cortex here is your decision making. That's your judgment. That's your problem solving area, and that is the area that is most affected by alcohol consumption in a growing brain. So as you continue to expose that part of the brain to alcohol as a toxin early in life, your ability to use that part of your brain later in life to reason, to problem solve, is not as sharp as a person who hasn't had the alcohol exposure. So you're looking at career possibilities, you're looking at disability. I mean, there are a number of outcomes that you don't know until you get there and you say, "Oh God, I wish I hadn't had the alcohol party at age 16." There are, again, it's not like that immediate thing that we experience with opioids. This is such a long-term thing. It's hard to look ahead, but I try to help them look at the ability to reason. That judgment factor goes away, or it's diminished later in life because of alcohol exposure earlier in life.
Yeah, and that's a high cost.
It's
so
very high cost.
One last question before we run out of time.
Sure.
What is it that you could have heard early on in your journey and your relationship to alcohol that might have made a difference? What would you have liked somebody to tell you, or would it have made a difference?
Well, I wouldn't exchange any part of my journey for anything. It is part of my experience on this planet. This is me. Would have anything have changed it? Probably the accessibility. to not have it. I was 14 when I had my first drink, and all we did was, walked up to a convenience store. This is back in the 80s, okay? It was a different time. But, walk up to a convenience store, say, hey, bud, will you pick us up a six-pack? That was that easy back then. So that part may have changed something, but I have the genetic package. I live in Wisconsin. We excuse it as a rite of passage, and I would have found my way onto this journey, I'm sure, but I'm not regretting a step of it.
Yeah, because it got you where you are now. So
I'm living my best life ever, so I can't complain.
So we have 2 minutes left. Anything you want to say? Any statement you want to make?
Certainly visit my website, which is Alcohologist, alcohologist.com. I have a lot of white papers out there. I have some more statistical information that's hard to convey just in a brief time here, Natasha. But it's all out there on alcohologist.com. And there's also an opportunity for people to communicate with me through there and through Facebook. And I do communicate with everybody who reaches out to me just to make sure that if they need help, help's available. And if they have questions, they get answers.
Yeah, that's great. And as a life coach, I always talk about just one step. It's not like tomorrow I'm going to give up drinking, or oh my God, I have to give up drinking. But visiting your website, reading one of your books, reaching out to you. So I invite people to do that. Simple, small measures to begin with.
That's all it takes.
Thank you so much for being my guest. Thank you for all the information, and good luck in this uphill battle.
All right. Thank you for your time today, Natasha. Really appreciate it.
My name is Natasha Sherman. Thank you for joining us.